So now we're getting into this is informational, our monthly budget report. So I turn the time over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman, members of the board, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones with your monthly budget report. I am able to attest that the Utah State Board of Education is fiscally responsible and able to meet all obligations and commitments, all known obligations and commitments for this fiscal year. We are early in the year, in this fiscal year 22. The report that's in front of you and in front of the public for their review as well is from what we call period 2 or August of 2021. As you know, the state fiscal year begins on July 1st, so is the second month of state fiscal year 22. One key takeaway, and this is pretty much normal for this time of year, as you progress or look through each one of the sections, you can see that our expenditures are fairly low across the sections. That's typical of the beginning of every year. There's also later today in the Finance Committee back brief or update, from I believe it's Vice Chair Moss. We'll be covering the carry forward balances that were addressed or reviewed by the Finance Committee last month. That's an integral part of the monthly budget or the overall budget, that being the carry forward balances. So when we get to that agenda item today, I just ask for any questions or concerns with any one of the carry forward balances that were proposed to Finance Committee and that will be proposed to you as a board today. With that, Chair Huntsman, I'll pause for any questions or concerns through you by any of the board members on this, our monthly budget report, subject to period 2 or August of 2021.
Questions or comments from board members? Seeing none, will you please continue to the discretionary funds report?
Yes, sir. Discretionary funds report for your review. One key takeaway from this is if I could draw your attention to the upper right-hand corner of the document. Those are the particular fund types, state funds, for example, federal mineral lease. Tomorrow as well, your Finance Committee will drill down in a deeper look and review of the status of these funds, and then specifically in the main body of the report, the projects that you see in front of you, will address each one of those projects and make recommendations to you for your November meeting on whether to either continue projects or return funding back into the balances that you see up in the upper right-hand quadrant. So I look forward to that process. It's the right process to take with the Finance Committee so that they can in turn come back to the board in November for recommendations on the use of those funds. One example I do want to give is the state funds. You can see that we have an initial balance and then we have a remaining balance or availability of approximately $790,000. During the Finance Committee meeting tomorrow, we'll be making proposals for use of the $790,000. Once we update you in November with what the Finance Committee recommends, subject to their review tomorrow, there should be or will be other remaining funds, not only in the state funds, but others as well. And I encourage board members to take a look at those and come to the board with ideas or run through Finance Committee for use of those funds. Those are your funds. They are at your discretion and can be used. We'll always ensure absolutely allowability of the use of those funds, but they are available to you for at your discretion. With that, Chair Huntsman, I'll pause for any questions or concerns from board members related to the specificity of the discretionary funds report.
Questions or comments from board members? Member Earl?
Can you remind me, is that separate from mineral lease funds or is that mineral lease funds? Those are the discretionary.
So if you look up in our Chair, may I?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
Please.
In the upper right-hand quadrant, ma'am, is the types of funds that make up your overall discretionary funds, and federal mineral lease or FML is part of that. Is part of your overall discretionary fund account or balances. Chair Huntsman, did I answer board member Earl's question?
Did you have a follow-up?
Oh, so those are combined. They're together. Okay, that's what I wanted to understand. Could you remind me what the restrictions are on federal mineral lease funds? What can those be used for?
Actually,
Go ahead.
Yes, please respond.
okay, yes, sir. Federal mineral lease funds are intended for research and development type activities. That's pretty broad in the sense of, what amounts to research and development. We've used them in the past and we've been audited. And so far, we've always met that condition for allowable use of federal mineral lease. So the guardrails, to answer your question, Board Member Earl, are FML is intended for research and development purposes by the board.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to make sure I understood what that was for. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Superintendent Jones, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. Did you have anything else to add to any of your reports?
No, sir, I don't have anything else to add on the monthly budget report or the discretionary funds report, but if I may take a little bit of privilege to introduce our new school finance director. I don't think he was introduced this morning. Sam Uri is online. Could he unveil himself to the group? Sam, are you out there? No, okay. I'm not sure if he is. Okay, so Sam Uri is joining us. He replaces Patrick Lee as our school finance director. He'll participate obviously tomorrow in the finance committee meeting. So I just want to make sure that you're aware, all board members are aware through you, Chair Huntsman, that Sam just joined us. This is his first week. So that may be why, he wasn't introduced this morning, but this is his first full week with us. Welcome, Sam Uri, and we're looking forward to his knowledge, skills, and abilities. He is an experienced business administrator for charter schools, and we're just glad to have him, and just anxious to see him get to work and do great things and support the LEAs with the overall financial operations team. So welcome, Sam Uri, to the finance director position. Sir, thank you for that opportunity to introduce Sam. At this time, your direction, sir, we could turn it over to Sarah Young, Director Young, for the CARE/ARP portion of the monthly budget report.
Thank you for your participation today, and we'll look forward to meeting Sam tomorrow in finance. At this time, we'll invite Sarah Young. This is item 7.3. This is informational. It's an update on our COVID-19 relief fund, so it's an update.
Thank you so much. Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives for the State Board of Education, here to provide an update on the COVID-19 relief funds for K-12 education. So as a friendly reminder, when we talk about the COVID Okay, I'm back. So friendly reminder for the folks online, as we talk about the COVID-19 relief funding for K-12 education, that has been delivered to the Utah State Board of Education for providing opportunities for our K-12 schools and LEAs in several different buckets of funding. So as we provide our update noting that that funding is time limited based on when it was awarded to us, we provide our updates in alignment with each of those buckets. In terms of K-12 CARES education funding, I do want to share a table that is pretty small print, but bear with us. This was a table that we actually shared recently with the Utah legislature in terms of demonstrating to them the comprehensive nature of the resources that have come through for K-12 education COVID-19 response. You'll see the awards listed with the total amounts awarded in each of those categories, any specific directives on purpose that we received, received, distribution methods, a number of awards, and reimbursement deadlines. The two key items I'll call out are specific to the total amount that's been made to LEA awards, which is over $900 million. Again, you'll note the majority of these funds do go direct to our LEAs for them to be able to make decisions about specific use cases and needs. In addition to that, the Utah State Board of Education is administering all of these grants through a reimbursement process in the Utah Grants Management System. And as you can see by the count under number of awards at the very bottom, we're looking at over 1,100 different grants that are being managed specific to each of the individual LEAs and the individual funding streams. In terms of round one, this is our CARES funding that was received in May of 2020. This is where we discuss our ESSER or Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund 1 and our Governor's Emergency Education Relief or GEAR 1 fund, noting that this funding needs to be spent by September 30th, 2022. In terms of an update we have, as of September 13th, you'll see that we have reimbursed over 90% of the ESSER 1 90% base, a little over 80% of the base that was awarded to those LEAs that did not qualify for the Title I required federal distribution. And as for GEAR, we are still under 50%. We did highlight that particular funding stream with our superintendents in a recent update meeting. Those funds are specifically designed for services to support special education and students at risk of academic failure as directed by the governor's office. And so we do think that there's opportunities related to additional services and or opportunities for reimbursement for the services that have already been provided in that funding stream. In addition to that, you'll see at the bottom, we are highlighting the number of LEAs that have been fully reimbursed. This is important related to ESSER 2. They have to spend their ESSER 1 funding before they have access to spending their ESSER 2. And you can see that the state is making great progress with over 91 of our LEAs being fully reimbursed for the 90% distribution and 33 of the 48 in terms of the state 10% base. In terms of the second round of funding, this was the Coronavirus Supplemental Award that was authorized and delivered through the federal government at the end of December of 2020. This is where we see our ESSER 2 and our GEAR 2 funds living, noting that they need to be spent by September 30th, 2023. As a general reminder, when these were awarded to the field in April of 2021, 90% of the ESSER funds go direct to our LEAs to be able to create a local plan for response to COVID-19. And in our analysis and review of those plans, we see the majority of these funds being directed at addressing accelerated learning or students who may have experienced disrupted learning or have additional learning needs due to COVID-19, the purchasing of educational technology, as well as opportunities for summer learning and supplemental after-school programming at the local level. For ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, as a friendly reminder, because these numbers do appear lower, we like everyone to remember that LEAs are not able to access their ESSER 2 for reimbursement until they have completely been reimbursed in ESSER 1, noting the date differential in terms of those ESSER 1 funds expire first, and that this is not the case for the ARP ESSER awards, which we'll talk about here shortly, which are available for reimbursement at the point of award. For ESSER 2, you'll note that we continue to see increase in terms of reimbursements being requested. When we came to you last month, we were under 10%. We are now at 13% in terms of reimbursements made to LEAs related to the overall 90%. In addition to that, we are nearing a little over 18% for the 10% base for those LEA awards. And then GEAR 2 is an application, which we'll touch on here momentarily. We've also begun the process of reimbursement related to the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools or EANS awards that have been granted, and we are at a 4% reimbursement rate related to those needs. In addition, we noted GEAR 2 is an application and was distributed to LEAs based on the proportional population of special education and at-risk students they serve. I will note that GEAR 2 has a full, broad, authorized use case. It is not directed at just serving those populations as decided by the governor's office. We have extended the due date. Originally, it was due September 30th. That was a pretty quick turnaround from when LEAs had access to the opportunity to apply, and the governor's office supported extending it through the end of October, at which point we expect to have all of those funds awarded and then available for reimbursement. This is also where the governor's office has dedicated funds to the University of Utah Reading Clinic. They are as well in the Utah Grants Management System, submitting their plan and having those approved in partnership with the governor's office for reimbursement potential. As far as USBE state project updates, Chair, if I may, I'd like to introduce Sarah Harward, who's our CARES educational specialist, to speak about current updates related to the state projects the board has authorized for funding. Chair, if I may? Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Harward, CARES Educational Specialist. Just an overview for these state projects. 90% of the ESSER funds do go directly to our LEAs, and then these state projects are funded with the 10% of the ESSER award. The projects do have to align with the allowable use cases as well as be in response to COVID-19. And these projects are presented to the board and approved in open and public board meetings, and they are subject to the expiration date of the specific fund and are time limited. We do have one project from the ESSER 1 fund and then 6 from the ESSER 2 fund. I won't read them since they're the exact same from last month, but I will note that all of the projects are moving forward nicely with the different team leads. Some project highlights for our K-3 professional literacy project. Our project leaders have finalized the participant list, created the MINUS course for Unit 1, and scheduled the administration training. For the next generation demonstrated competency assessment, the project leaders have completed the collaboration with the design team and held the kickoff event for the course designers. And for our early learning coaches for rural Utah and our regional service centers, all early learning coaches have been hired and placed, and the project leaders held meetings with the regional service center directors and the early learning coaches. And with that, Chair, if I could turn it back to Sarah Young.
Thank you.
Yes, please, Sarah Young.
Thank you. So our last update in relationship to the COVID-19 relief funds is specific to the American Rescue Plan Act. These are the funds that were awarded in March of 2021 and need to be spent by September 30th of 2024. This is still an area that we are in progress as an agency, noting it's over $615 million that was awarded to Utah K-12, 90% going to the LEAs. We will be discussing as an action item after the overview, the opportunity to make awards related to the required allocation of 1% of the total award towards summer-based enrichment programs and 1% towards after-school programs, as is required by our federal partners. As far as the ESSER Plan LEA update, as a friendly reminder, these were due to the agency by September 17th of this previous month. LEAs did have to take these plans to their local school boards for prior approval before submitting to USBE. We've received 140 plans as of September 24th related to submissions in the grants management system. At the date this was pulled, we had 76 plans approved, and note that 5 LEAs did waive the opportunity for funds related to ARP awards. We are further than 76 as of today in terms of getting feedback to all of our LEAs in terms of whether their plans are accepted or if they've been recommended for revision.
Director Young, we have a couple questions maybe off that previous slide. Want to go first to Board Member Lear?
And mine's a general question. I just wanted to be sure I was clear. And you said this a couple times, so you have been. I'm just checking my hearing. So these are reimbursement programs. So that means if the LEAs don't submit the documentation that's required or the request for reimbursement, the USB doesn't have any responsibility to try to recoup funds, or is that right? They just the LEA either does its job and gets paid, or the money goes somewhere else. I just didn't want it to be a make work project for USBE.
Chair, if I may?
Please, yes.
Great. So In terms of the process, it is a reimbursement process, so you are correct. So the LEAs submit a plan describing how they're going to use the plan or the funds. We authorize those plans so that the LEAs can move forward with their spending with the assurance that they have an award in place for which to seek reimbursement for those activities. And then at the point that those activities occur, they submit documentation related to those expenditures in the grants management system. And then we provide a review of those documents, making sure they align with the plan and COVID-19 use cases, at which point the money goes to the LEA.
Okay, thanks. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. We have an additional question or comment. Member Straight?
Thank you. Do we have any additional insight on the 5 LEAs that waived their award opportunity?
So a couple of these LEAs I can share had waived previous federal awards as well. In some cases, these are very small schools that have very small populations and just didn't feel like the reporting requirements or the burden that would be placed related to some of the reporting and kind of business administrative needs required of these funds was ultimately worth it in terms of the needs they were identifying for COVID-19. One example is we have one of our charter schools that serves kind of the early learning space. And because they serve under 40 kids, looking at the overall award for ARP ESSER, $180,000, they just didn't feel like they had COVID-19 needs that really justified the administrative action related to applying and receiving that award.
Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up?
No.
Okay. Vice Chair Davis?
Yeah, thank you. So I was at a presentation recently that said that ESSER ARP funds is forcing us to use social and emotional learning. I thought that was not accurate, but can you clarify for us, because I just want to make sure I'm understanding right.
Of course.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the requirements for ARP ESSER, these particular funds do require at both the state as well as the local level that 20% of the total award at the local level goes to addressing disrupted learning or accelerated learning needs. It also clarifies that those needs may be beyond academic as identified by the local community needs. So there is nothing that requires expenditures or a specific implementation of curriculum in those areas unless it is identified as a specific need and selected for that use case by the local leaders.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, so there's nothing that requires that. That's an option that local boards can vote on if they want to as part of that 20%, but there's nothing that requires it.
Correct. No requirements, just an opportunity.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Belknap?
Yeah, Miss Sarah, I have a question on if the due date is September 17th and we aren't getting them till September 24th, why are we doing that? Or is that the plans were in and then they were finally approved?
Great question. So we prepared this information for the board on September 24th. And so when we're providing an update, I always like to make sure we provide the date that that information was pulled. We have since approved many more than 76 LEA plans, but for the purpose of providing the appropriate information by the due date of board backup, that's why we're calling it out by that date, not saying that's where we are today.
Okay, sorry.
Follow
So
up?
the 17th, sorry, Chair. The 17th is when they had to have them in and then the process of approving. Chair, may I have one more follow-up?
Yes.
Okay, when they turn in their plans and they are approved, do you ever not approve what they have turned in because we're hearing some grumblings that maybe it was in their plan and then it seems like the road or the path has changed?
So in terms of reimbursements or the plan
Yes.
itself?
The
Reimbursements.
Reimbursement from their original plan.
So a lot of the reimbursement documentation is going to be specific to then more granular use cases than necessarily the broad authorizations of the plan. An example I can provide is that a plan may be approved specific to providing, improved opportunities for addressing mathematics needs related to accelerated learning. Great. And then sometimes those receipts come through and they don't necessarily clearly tie to that mathematics learning. Maybe they purchased, something that was edible to use as manipulatives, and we're just seeking clarity in terms of, was that edible for the purposes of snacks or was that edible for the purposes of learning? Because for us, that requirement for learning is there in what has been approved, and we just want to make sure that those items match up. We don't like taking guesses on that at the State Board of Education, and that's when we provide outreach to the LEAs saying, can you provide clarity for us on how this relates to COVID?
Okay.
Chair Huntsman, not counting M&Ms. We can do that.
Well, I'm just a creative writer. Member Earl.
Yes, I was wondering, can you specify, can a district go back and make an amendment to their original? So they could submit a change if they have a direction they would like to go and originally from their original direction. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this time, so please continue.
Okay, so we will be bringing this to you, but just as a friendly reminder, the after school and summer learning is up for an action item after this. This is over $12 million that was available through a competitive grant competition. It does require a partnership between a community-based organization or local business with one of our LEAs. And
Sarah, are you going to go into that now?
No, sorry,
that would be a little- when-
we're providing a preview.
Okay.
Before the
All
action
right.
item comes
But
up.
when we get to that action item, if you let we pause, then I'll brief the board that now we're going into the actionable. Okay, thank you.
We have a separate slide deck. So
All right.
this is just a reminder that this is an action item here today.
Okay, thank you.
As far as where we are in LEA approvals. For those LEAs that have received approval, they're all the way in step 6. They can start seeking reimbursement immediately against their ARP funds in terms of making sure that they're available for the community for local needs. Finally, just as a highlight of additional staff or action that has been taken, we are still in the process of reviewing revisions for LEA ARP ESSER plans and supporting next steps towards that award or revision. Generally speaking, revisions are requested when an LEA plan did not or has something missing, such as they didn't submit a plan that has a signature that's required related to the assurances. These tend to be minor technical things. They're not large-scale issues. So we're working to support the LEAs in getting those in and approved. Additionally, GOPB, our partners with the governor's office, is actually the first entity that reviews all Gear 2 plans because this is a governor's award. So it's our way of partnering with them to make sure that the governor's agency and staff are aware of all of the LEA plans and have that opportunity to provide approvals before USBE staff takes action in the grants management system. Additionally, the Utah Department of Health released their CDC grant through the coronavirus.utah.gov website related to our K-12 LEAs being able to apply for additional funds for temporary school nursing personnel. This went live on October 1st and is actually due to the Department of Health by October 15th. There are specific districts that were prioritized for award based on what was their COVID-19 burden as related to the case counts being administered by the Department of Health, but USBE is providing guidance and technical support in terms of that construction. Partnering with LFA and GOPB on reporting requirements, we are still awaiting the final reporting requirements from the U.S. Department of Education, but have proactively presented the draft reporting requirements to our partners at the legislature and the governor's office so they can provide feedback about what additional information they may need so we can do a single reporting ask of the LEAs as opposed to doing it piece by piece in preparation for legislative session. Last but not least, we are still awaiting some outcomes related to our state application for the American Rescue Plan for students experiencing homelessness, as well as for the American Rescue Plan for the second potential award for the emergency assistance for non-public schools in terms of those awards. For the latter, we did have a conversation with the U.S. Department of Education yesterday with our partners with the governor's office and are providing supplemental information as requested for them to be able to take action on our application request. Friendly reminder, the state transparency dashboard is available at schools.utah.gov/coronavirus. This is where we place all the information about who's getting what related to each of these individual awards, what is available to each local community, and then where they're seeking reimbursement against all of the categories. And this is something we will continue to update over the course of the COVID-19 funding period. We will be back in November. And as a part of coming back in November, I'd just like to remind board members of our timeline to be able to begin the process of considering where the remaining state reserve funds will be encumbered and obligated to. That is a decision that we will be asking this board to make in December of this year, related to being able to establish, based on some of the accountability data that will be provided by Assistant Superintendent Nielsen, clear direction to staff on where those additional funds will be used in preparation for meeting our requirements for the U.S. Department of Education's state plan response, as well as in preparation for legislative session, where we know our policymakers are asking where are these funds going and wanting to be able to provide a clear response to that. With that, that concludes our update for today. If there are any additional questions, Chair.
Yes, Member Earl?
So are you saying you want our recommendations? And if so, who do we send those to for the usage of those funds?
Thank you. So we will be seeking your recommendations and those next steps after the November board meeting as a part of a conversation based on the presentation of state assessment data. One of the key pieces is that the state is required to spend 5% of our total award towards addressing accelerated learning or disrupted learning as it may have occurred due to COVID. We want you as board members to have that assessment data to then inform the recommendations that you're making related to the allocation of those funds.
And where do I, yes, thank you. Where do I find, is it just the ESSER contract? Is it different than the districts? In other words, the LEAs, what our criteria is for meeting those?
Yes.
And I can find it just on the ARP funding that's on our website, right? Is that accurate?
You can. I would also just highlight that it is articulated in the overview. So we are required to commit $30.7 million towards accelerated learning, the 1% towards summer enrichment and after school, and then you have 2.5% that's available for flexible use cases, provided they're in response to COVID-19.
And the criteria would be on the internet. Okay. When I find that, I'll clip it and send it to you and say, am I right?
Yes.
So, okay, thanks.
Sounds great.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions or comments. So we're moving on then to, this is an actionable item, 7.3.1. So are you going to lead that one?
So Chair, if I may, if I can invite Camille Sheik up, our educational specialist who is over our 21st Century Grants and After School
Camille.
Programming.
Yeah.
Dr. Dixon, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to acknowledge Sarah Harward, who was at the table when we first started back in the spring and summer trying to get PPE out to the schools and had a basement. Our basement was a warehouse. We needed help, and we found Sarah Harward, and her job has morphed into something much bigger and much more ominous, and she is an amazing support. And I just, she sat there in silence, but I just wanted to thank her so much. She's taken on this huge role that the LEAs have really come to depend on her, and she's doing amazing
You're cutting
work,
into
so-
my chair's report, because I
Oh,
was going to do a
okay.
little shout out then, but that's
Sorry.
okay.
Well, she sat there in silence, so I just wanted you to know that her role has definitely
There is a
morphed.
Sarah duel, so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I apologize, sir.
Please continue. Okay, all right, we're good.
Okay. Education specialist with the Utah State Board of Education. So I oversee federal funding for after school. And so we're excited to have this opportunity to fund more after school and community grants. Also, often with the 21st Century Grant, we don't have a lot of rural applicants who receive the funds. So we have 7 rural applicants. We're very excited to bring these to, our community. So as Sarah mentioned, this comes from the set-aside funding, the 1% for after school. So this is school year after school funding, the 1% for summer after school funding. All of these applications, which there were 33, went through a rigorous peer review process. All applicants had access to the rubric that our reviewers utilized to determine who would receive funding. So they individually scored with the rubric, and then they met afterwards to further discuss any scoring discrepancies or other things like that. So we're recommending that 25 applications receive funding. As I mentioned, we do have some rural communities who can be served by these opportunities. And as with the other American Rescue Plan Act funds, these are all administered through reimbursement, so they will go through the Utah grant system. So this table here demonstrates what we have available. We had, the 6.1 million for both after school, 6.1 million for summer. And then our request for our school year after school programming was over 17 million. So there is quite a bit of need. And then 8.7 million for summer. So we do request that the Utah State Board of Education approves a recommended list of after-school and summer learning grant applications for the American Rescue Plan ESSER funding.
Are you ready for questions?
Oh, and yes, any questions?
Okay. Member Hutchings.
Thank you. I just have a quick question about the rubric. Was that made available? I would be interested in taking a look.
Yes, it was made publicly available, and I can also send it to you. Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, Chair, I forgot to ask if I could respond.
Okay, you're fine. Member Earl.
I have a number of questions. We've been engaging in dialogue for all month on these, but I'm hoping to ask them those questions that I've been asking them in an open forum area so that the public hears those too. These are a couple of the questions. So if an organization or an entity receives funding, but they don't meet code or rule that USBE would be following, what are the procedures for notifying them, or how does that play out?
Camille.
Thank you. So we would go through a kind of internal review process and work with the organization, if it's a community-based organization or the local education agency, and kind of review what is in question, kind of figure out if it was a miscommunication or whatever it was, and then most of the time it is sometimes a miscommunication about what the focus is, and then we could work as an internal committee to decide if their corrective action is needed, if we need to have a amendment to their plan, but working together to figure that out, if we need an amendment, if they need a corrective action, or, we don't often pool funding, but if that needs to happen, we would follow the appropriate steps. All of the applicants agreed to the program assurances, so we would refer back to that and work with our CARES team, as well as any of the other leadership members to determine what the next steps are. But we always try to resolve things, have open, transparent conversations first to determine what is the issue, and then go from there if it is to create a plan, put them on corrective action, whatever that may be.
Follow up?
Yes. The other question a couple of questions, but one of them is there's a number of these that are data sharing. So, for example, one of the organizations, it's an expansion of common data entry and collection to ensure analysis and evaluation. And it's schools sharing their data with private entities. And specifically, along the lines of what they've been collecting in the school on social and emotional programming, whether that's Panorama or other entities. My concern lies with large entities collecting private data on children, especially individual elements. I don't know if you can speak to concern there and how we're addressing that, allowing parents to know what's going on, that's kind of broad, but.
Camille?
Yes, thank you. So all of our, we encourage all of our applicants to have the appropriate data sharing agreements in place. And then we also require parental disclosure and consent. So parents, families are aware of what data will be shared, how it will be shared. We work closely with Whitney Phillips and her team over in data privacy. We have some templates that they can utilize for parent disclosure and consent to ensure that there's transparency if they are participating in the program. All of these programs are optional, but if they are participating, how is the data shared? How is it used? So there's full transparency.
Okay.
Can I?
Follow up?
Thanks, yes. Let's see. This goes to our board rules, specifically our educational equity. I'm just hoping, and I'm sure this is the case, that they're aware of the restrictions within those, within that particular rule, and if not, is there a way to make sure they're aware of those? A number of these organizations, as I read through them, and I haven't got through all of them, it's pretty extensive, did have, some of the language was very, I wondered what their direction was, right? It seemed to be leading in a certain direction that may violate some of those provisions. So anyways, are they aware of what our rules are? Does that make sense?
Director Young, Camille or Sarah, either one.
Thank you. So Director Young, so in response to that, it's kind of a two-part approach. The first one is from the state level, making sure that this information is shared and widely available to all awardees. The second component of that is going to be our LEAs, and recognizing that all of these entities are working in partnership with an LEA in the same way that we provide an LEA training related to expectations for K-12 education. We also have expectations that they coordinate on those efforts, and was one of the key elements we evaluated was the strength of that partnership to make sure that they're receiving both of those kind of components so that there is full transparency on those expectations and the ability to follow them.
Member Moss?
Just really quick question. I'm just curious in the selection process, looking through the list of those who were approved and not, without going into detail about any particular school, what were the problems with those that were not accepted? What was generally the deficiency in their application?
I think some of the feedback was, and we do provide feedback to all applicants, was they just weren't detailed enough. There perhaps was not enough coordination between the local education agency and the community-based organization, and maybe they just heard about it. They didn't hear about it in time for whatever reason, but we do always try to provide feedback. We have excellent reviewers, and we tell them this feedback is so critical because they want to get more funding opportunities. So that's what I would say generally is the biggest thing I've heard from the reviewers.
Okay. Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes, I just want to make sure that I have full clarity. Yes, these groups are signing data privacy agreements, not can or should.
They do, correct.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion, Chair.
Okay. Vice Chair Belknap?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Let's see. Do I have it here?
Yeah, there's one right here.
Oh,
Right
it's
there.
right there? Okay. I'd like to move that the Utah State Board of Education approves the recommended list of after-school and summer learning grant applications for APR and ESSER funding.
Second, Member Straight, you want to speak to your motion?
No, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, the motion before the board is that the Utah State Board of Education approve the recommended list of after-school and summer learning grant applications for ARPS ESSER funding. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. We have two noes. Will your noes raise your hand? Now, Member Earl, Member Klein. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Looking at our looking at the clock here, we're not gonna, I think we're gonna have a break for lunch right now. So we're gonna break for a half hour, and then we want to get right back into our agenda. We still have quite a bit of work to do. Thank you for your work this far, and those that have been with us. Happy lunch.